My mum's cousin saw something deep in the ocean in the early 80s. So my mum's cousin was a completely normal young man until he returned early from mandatory military service in Cuba. The family was told that he had been in a submarine with the Russians, not sure where, and he apparently saw something, no one knows what, that made him go insane, and he was never the same after that. I recently went on vacation with my parents to a resort. One night my dad went to bed early while my mum and I sat outside and talked. She is a very reserved woman who keeps many things to herself and likes small talk, so this caught me completely off guard. She was looking up at the sky and seemed like she was thinking hard about something. She suddenly asks me, in Spanish, but I'll translate it all to English and change names. "Do you remember cousin Jorge? You met him when you were little, but he died not long after." I did remember him a little. I remembered going to Cuba with my parents to visit family, and I met cousin Jorge. I was about 8. He was very sweet and welcoming, about my dad's age. He asked me so many questions about life in the US and played games with me. After a while, he went back over to the adults and suddenly he became hysterical, crying and hyperventilating, yelling things I couldn't understand. It scared me, so I hid. That was all I remember of him. My mom proceeded to tell me what she remembers of him. This took place in Havana, where they're from. My mom said, "He was a completely normal person. We used to spend a lot of time together because he lived next door. He was about 10 years older than me, but he took me everywhere. Running errands, hanging out with his friends. He helped people with housework and with livestock. There was never anything odd about him. Everyone loved him. Then, when I was about 7 or 8, he was 17 or 18. He had to do his mandatory military service as every male did in Cuba. At first, he wrote me letters, but after a few months, those stopped. He would only write to his mother, and I overheard her talking to my mum and Grandma Hilda about how something about his letters didn't seem right. And then the letters stopped altogether. One day, I was at my aunt's, Jorge's mum's, and there is a knock at our door. I answered it, and there were 2 men in military uniforms. My aunt and my grandma hurried towards the door and told me to go away. I hid behind the hallway wall and listened. I couldn't hear everything, but the men said that cousin Jorge was unwell and he was being sent back home. A couple weeks later, sure enough, cousin Jorge gets sent back, escorted by another young soldier who was his friend. Grandma later told me that his friend had quietly let them know that cousin Jorge had apparently been in a submarine with the Russians, no idea where, and that while he was down there, he saw something and immediately went haywire. After that, cousin Jorge was very different. He'd be acting completely normally and randomly go into hysterics, screaming nonsense, crying, throwing things. He refused to talk about his military service. One day when I was 16, someone in the neighborhood gave me my first Bible. I was so excited. We didn't have much of anything, so being given a Bible as a gift was so exciting for me. I came home with it and cousin Jorge was there. He saw it and stared at it in my hands for a moment. He then stood up and walked over to me, grabbed the Bible from my hands and flipped to the first chapter. He then said, "Genesis, the first great lie." The way he said it terrified me, and I grabbed the Bible back in case he'd try to destroy it. He didn't follow me when I left, but I could hear him having another meltdown. Cousin Jorge never recovered. He ended up becoming extremely religious later in life, but still had frequent episodes and delusions. He passed in the early 2010s from a heart attack. My mum adored him, and I know that hurt her badly to see him suddenly change like that. I could see the pain in her eyes as she told me all of this, staring off into the night sky as she spoke. I have a couple theories of what may have happened. 1. He may have been subjected to psychological experiments at the hands of the Cuban and/or Russian military that led him to lose his mind. 2. He may have developed a mental illness later in life. I remember reading that schizophrenia often comes around in males in their early 20s. The stress of military service could have triggered an underlying mental illness. 3. He really saw something that made him snap. But what could it have been? If anyone else has any theories, I'd love to hear them.